Arise, ye workers, from your slumber. Arise, ye wretched of the earth. For louder than volcanoes' thunder is the better world in birth. All across the glory of creation, we are joining in the fight, linking arms in every nation to face the parasites. Comrades, come rally, for the struggle carries on. The Internationale unites the world in song, and so comrades, come rally, and the last fight let us face. The Internationale unites the human race. We alone are the creators, and this world is ours by right. For us, the sun will shine forever, with its purifying light. So let the ruling classes tremble and try to save their skins. We have nothing to lose except our shackles, and we have the world to win. So, comrades, come rally, for the struggle carries on. The Internationale unites the world in song, and so comrades, come rally, and the last fight let us face. The Internationale unites the human race.
Folks, thank you. I want to thank you specifically, Paul, for that absolutely amazing performance of the Internationale. I caught myself tapping my foot under my desk. It's so good to have great musicians like you among us, and all those watching. I want to thank you for being here tonight to begin perhaps our new year, usher out 2020, and welcome in 2021 with the goal of socialism, as always. And what a better time to have that in our sights after the living hell that we have been through in 2020. Starting in, it's crazy to think really what all has happened in this year. If some of you can turn your brains all the way back to January, I could barely do it this morning. And we nearly started off this year with a war after the Trump administration killed General Soleimani. In February, the PRC made us and the rest of the world aware of the threat of COVID-19. And we've seen the effects of it carry from February to December, and it doesn't look like there's an end in sight. We've seen in this year alone an absolutely massive economic downturn, as well as an even more powerful social upheaval with the Black Lives Matter movements and the involvement of socialists and communists fighting for the rights of minorities and the oppressed nationalities within the U.S. And to that, all of you who have been involved in the Black Lives Matter movement and been boots on the ground and coordinating these protests and demonstrations and riots, I want to, with all of my heart, thank you. And I speak for everyone within the Center for Political Innovation. You really, history will remember you well. We look forward this evening to a quick message of solidarity from a member of the Communist Party of India. For those of you who are not aware, India is experiencing the largest labor strike in the history of the world. 250 million workers are on strike in India right now. And to no one's surprise, the capitalist media does not cover this. Because when you look at these crowds and the sheer power of working folks working together, it just as the Internationale says, it makes the oppressing classes tremble in fear at the might of the people. We look forward to more cultural performances from our great folks here at CPI, as well as an inspiring message from Mr. Caleb Maupin. As he always says, now more than ever, we need a government of decisive action made of the working class, made explicitly for the working class. Well, I won't talk your ears off anymore. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Miss Lily Goldklang, as she gives a report and an update and a speech on capitalism and consumerism. Lily, go ahead.
Hey everybody, so I'm Lily. You might have seen me on here before. I'm a young person interested in socialism, and I just wanted to talk about something that I've been seeing a lot that I think is worth discussing. So I'm sure I'm not the only one. During COVID, quarantine, lockdown, I've been engaging in a lot of online discourse about socialism, Marxism. I mean, there's not really much else to do. So I've noticed when it comes to socialism, it seems many people only have half the picture. The broadly online left, they understand a major problem with capitalism, the distinction and the contradictions between the workers and the bosses, or the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, as Marx would put it. But there's also another aspect that's often overlooked. There's the anarchy in social production, or the inherent irrationality and chaos of production carried out when it's carried out for profit, if I had to boil it down. To paraphrase Frederick Engels from Socialism, Utopia, and Scientific, socialism is the recognition of class antagonisms, that's part one, and the recognition of the anarchy in production, part two. So what is the anarchy in production? So kind of a general formula I wrote out here is production for profit plus time equals economic crisis. In the pursuit of profits, the bosses move to make production more efficient. They might have more machinery, further eliminating workers from the assembly line. So they are able to pay the workers less. But in doing this, even though they're paying the workers less, the production is either the same or more. And the working class as a whole has less money, because this trend isn't just isolated to one or two factories. This is the general law of motion across the entire capitalist economy. So the working class as a whole has less money because production's been made more efficient and they're less needed. But here's the problem. Workers are also consumers. And less wages for consumers means less sales for producers. They can't buy back the products they're producing. And less sales for producers means less work for consumers. And a crisis ensues due to this kind of feedback loop. They reinforce the other. And then basically the economy is just grinded to a halt. No one can hire anybody and no one can buy anything. So why can't we just have worker cooperatives? Why can't we just have everything like it is right now, but we just have worker cooperatives? Wouldn't that solve the problem? There would be no bosses exploiting us. Well, this is what a lot of people say, so let's address this. Worker cooperatives, they're a good thing because they eliminate the distinction between the boss and the worker. There's no bourgeoisie exploiting the proletariat's labor and extracting surplus value. And every socialist country to date has had a huge cooperative sector: the Soviet Union, China, Cuba, Vietnam, etc. But if these worker cooperatives are just functioning within a market economy with no form of central planning whatsoever, as is called for by these voices on the internet, there will still be problems with the anarchy of production because the cooperatives are still functioning according to the profit motive. So they need profit to survive in a profit-based economy. And eventually they're going to resort to the same tactics, eliminating workers from production, trying to make it more efficient, cutting their own wages to give more to their firms. And the same problem arises, and you're going to have cyclical economic crises, which is the same problem that we have under capitalism. So while worker cooperatives are a good thing, and they were definitely going to play a big role in socialist America that we're going to build, and we hope to build with the Center for Political Innovation, they're not the end-all be-all, and they're only half the picture. Thank you. That's all I got, Keaton.
Lily, I really appreciate the words of wisdom that you've been able to give us in the audience tonight. And what you're saying is so true about the anarchy of production, something I think all of us experience in our day-to-day life. And with the economic downturn that we're facing, nothing could have highlighted it better, Lily. Thank you so much. I also want to take a minute and thank David Fox so much. $50 donation right off the bat. We really do appreciate it. And it'll help us keep moving forward in the fight for the working class, both here in the U.S. and globally. Next, I want to welcome Speaker Gavin Lockhart to present his report and enlighten us as well. Gavin, go ahead.
After years of ignoring the anti-porn and anti-trafficking movement, the New York Times published an article entitled "The Children of Pornhub." The Washington Post ran a similar article. These, combined with a pressure campaign signed by many people, including CPI members, resulted in all three major credit card companies ending their ties with Canadian sexual exploitation company MindGeek. What prompted the imperialist media to admit that there is a problem? We can only speculate. Internationally, there have been many victories as well in 2020 that we had nothing to do with. Bolivia's elected leftist government has appointed a 19-year-old soccer team captain, Cielo Bezaga, as vice minister of sports, making her the youngest official. In India, Arya Rajendra, a 21-year-old member of the Communist Party of India, Marxist, has been elected as the mayor of the largest city in Kerala. Many other things could be said, and though the negative aspects of 2020 are undeniable, we have seen several victories in these last few weeks that ought to make us smile.
Thank you, Gavin, for presenting. We appreciate the time and you being able to be here and talk about the economic downturn that we're all experiencing. And of course, we hope to see lives of everyone improve as the new year comes forward. But of course, we understand that ultimately capitalism is going to fail, and even just an upsurge in our buying power is not the solution that we need, that the world, the planet, the people need. I'd like to welcome Ms. Charlotte Forrester to begin her cultural performance of an excerpt from a play. I'm very excited to be able to see it, and I hope you all are too. Charlotte, are you ready? Oh, I don't think we have audio from you, Charlotte.
Oh, here we go.
There we
Hi,
go.
everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So for you in the audience, you may recognize me in the chat as Shar Darling. And tonight I am going to be reading a piece from a play called Waiting for Lefty. Waiting for Lefty is a 1935 play by American playwright Clifford Odets. This was his first play to be produced, and it consists of a series of related vignettes. The entire play is framed by a meeting of cab drivers who are playing a labor strike. And this was written in the height of the Great Depression, when there is a massive hunger and people were being kicked out of their homes. Pretty much like today, except today is going to be a lot worse. So also, at the end of the reading, I'm going to ask everyone here to scream out strike. When I say, well, what's the answer? We all scream out strike. All right, so with all due, oh, hold on. My first time doing this, by the way, so I'll be patient. Okay. All right, so without further ado, Waiting for Lefty. Ladies and gentlemen, and I don't let anyone tell you we ain't going to get some ladies in a sea of upturned faces, only they're wearing pants. Well, maybe I don't know a thing. Maybe I fell out of a cradle when I was a kid, and I've been right since. You can tell. Sit down, cockeye. Who's paying you for those remarks, buddy? Moscow Gold? Well, maybe I got a glass eye, but it come from working in a factory at the age of 11. They hooked it out because they didn't have a shield on the works. But I wear it like a medal because it tells the world where I belong, deep down in the working class. We had delegates in the union there, all kinds of secretaries and treasurers, walking delegates. but not with blisters on their feet. Oh no. On their fat little asses, sitting on the cushions and raking in a Mazuma. Sit down, boys. I'm just saying that talk that about unions in general. I know it ain't true here. Why? No. Our officers all in all aces. Why? I've seen our own secretary, Fat, walk out of here his way and to step on a cockroach. No, boys, don't think. You're out of order. Am I out of order? No, speak, go on. Yes, our officers are all aces, but I remember here, and no experience in Philly either. Today, I couldn't wear my union button. The thing happened. When I take the old coat off the wall, I see she's smoking. I'm on a Sauvignon in the old union button isn't on fire. Yep. The old celluloid was making the most god-awful stink. The landlady come up and give me hell. You know what happened? That old union button just blushed itself to death. Ashamed. Can you beat it? Sit down, Keller. Nobody's interested. Yes, they are. Sit down, like he tells you. And when I'm finished, what's the answer, boys? The answer is if we Reds, because we want to strike, then we got to take their salute too. You know how they do it? What is that?
Strike.
An uppercut. The good old uppercut to the chin. Hell, some of the boys ain't even got a shirt on their backs. What's the boss's class trying to do? Make a nudist colony out of us? Don't laugh. Nothing's funny. This is your life and mine. It's skull and bones every inch of the road. Christ, we're dying by inches. For what? For the debutantes to have their sweet coming up parties in the Ritz. Papa's got a daughter. She's got to get her picture in the papers. Christ, they're making them high with our blood. Joe said it. Slow death or fight. It's war. You, Edna. God love your mouth. Sid and Flurry, the other boys, old Doc Barnes, fight with us for right. It's war. Working class, unite and fight. Tear down the slaughterhouse of our old lives. Let freedom ring. These slick slobs stand here telling us about boogeymen. That's a new one for the kids. The Reds is the boogeyman. But the man who got me food in 1932. He called me comrade. The one who picked me food, and the one who picked up where I bled. He called me comrade too. What are we waiting for? Don't wait for Lefty. He may never come. Every minute. They just found Lefty. They found Lefty behind the car barns with a bullet in his head. Hear it, boys? Hear it, boys? Hell, listen to me. Coast to coast. Hello, America. Hello. We're storming birds of the working class. Workers of the world are bones and blood. And when we die, they'll know what we did to make a new world. Christ, cut up these little pieces. We'll die for what is right. Put fruit trees in our ashes. Now tell me, what is the answer?
Strike.
Strike!
Louder!
Strike!
Strike.
Right.
Strike.
Louder! Again!
Strike.
Strike!
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 Strike.
Strike!
Strike.
Right.
I hope I wasn't too hammy.
Wonderfully done, Charlotte. Thank it's beautiful, really, to have so many talented members within this organization, and to recreate and bring back and popularize a culture of communism within the U.S., a working class culture. To bring back and revitalize that is going to be, and we can see through the works that so many of you here are doing and so many of you watching, we are building what is necessary. It's a great reminder hearing that to remember the struggles of the early strikes and the days of building labor power that has won us, because we must remember no right is given, it is only one. The bosses give nothing away. That has allowed us to not have to have our nose to the steel mill from 6 o'clock in the morning until 10 o'clock at night. That allows us the struggles, the death, and the battles of our forebears in the class struggle is what enables us to be here together, gathered and fighting for the interests of the working class. Harry Haywood, who helped found the IWW, has the beautiful quote that I think applies to every member of the working class. And it's, I may not have read Marx's Capital, but I have the marks of capital all over me. With that, I would like to get all of you excited to listen to a short message from a revolutionary member of the Communist Party of India. I'll make sure I'm pronouncing this right. Shayanta Sen, is that correct? I think so. So, without further ado, Caleb, if you can go ahead and pull that up, and we will look forward to it.
Hello everyone, greetings from India. As you may know, there are over 1 million farmers protesting near the Indian capital at this very moment. And they have been there for over a month now. They have laid siege near the national highways connecting the Indian capital to the rest of India. The government has tried everything they could, like water cannoning them, putting up trenches, digging up holes in the highways, police brutality, but they had overcome everything and reached near the Indian capital. They have rationed for 5 more months, and they have demanded that the government take back all the anti-farmers law that the government has passed during this pandemic, which would put their life at risk, since agricultural sector is already under severe distress. And even as we speak today, several thousands of other farmers from different states would be joining them today, and several thousand more tomorrow. And India has seen some of the biggest strikes in the history of humankind over the last few years. Just last month, we organized perhaps the biggest protest in human history, with over 250 million workers participating in it. And one of the most important thing is that people from not only blue collar jobs, but people associated with white collar jobs have also supported us, like the IT sector or cab drivers, delivery boys. So it has not just the traditional farmers or industrial workers. So that is a significant development. And beside workers and farmers, students, women have been at the forefront of this protest. I know that many people criticize the Indian left for participating in democracy, that is bourgeois democracy, but that is only part of the left strategy here. Because if we go by the evidence, the left would not have been able to organize these protests if their core were not among the people on the streets, among these movements. And we know that a revolution cannot happen without a revolutionary theory and a mass well aware of that. Ironically, this month signifies the 29th year of the fall of the USSR. So the capitalists, the reactionaries should be celebrating it, but they are not even talking about it, not just in India, all over the world. Because in the last 29 years, the human race have suffered severely. And many people have now started to see that neoliberalism is not the answer. Marxism, communism has been relevant more than ever. We here in India, we the result of last year's parliamentary election was very poor. In fact, the left has done in the history of Indian politics. But still, despite that, we have been able to organize several movements regarding the citizenship bill, which you may or may not know about the farmers bill, about some labor codes that the government has introduced. So it not just in India but all over the world, the last few months, the last few years have been significant. And as you may know, that the Modi government is a far-right government. They have fascist ideologies, and the Indian bourgeoisie, they chose them as their representative after the recession of 2008 and 9, hoping that they would smooth their way into the monopoly, and they did in several ways. And as a result, the life of people have become worse. Many people have lost their job. Many have fallen back into poverty. But inequality has skyrocketed. But if anything, if we go by the recent trends, that the left has been able to organize people irrespective of race, irrespective of religion, irrespective of ethnicity, because these are the lines that the Modi government divides people. They divide people, and they hide the fact that they are actually working for only the 1%. And so people have started to see that, and as time goes by, we will be able to organize more people and hoping to overthrow this government.
Wow. It's really, it puts it in perspective, I think, at least for me, to be able to hear and listen to the words of someone from a country and from a party that could very well be on its way to being the next socialist nation, the first new socialist nation, massive country to usher in a government of the working class. And folks, think for just a moment, step back and think of just the sheer amount of power for the working class internationally, not just in India, that would be gained from a successful Indian revolution. India and China would no longer be pitted against each other. The future is bright, comrades. The future for socialism, for the working class ahead of us looking. We have a century in front of us of class struggle, but we will come out victorious. Our next speaker is going to be another cultural performance from Paul. And Paul, if you're ready, you can go ahead and take the floor.
Well, thank you very much. This has been a wonderful evening, very informative and cool. And after and what you guys are saying about artistic expression, along these political lines, and after seeing Charlotte's performance, it made me think, well, no wonder McCarthy wanted to purge, the arts and culture of this kind of thinking. But anyway, this is a song that you might know from the Civil War, but it was a Union fighting song that I think holds true very much today in our own fight to liberate the wage slaves like ourselves of the current era. We will rally round the flag, boys, rally once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom. Gather on the hillside, gather on the plain, shouting the battle cry of freedom. The Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah! Down with the traitor and up with the star. Rally around the flag, boys, rally once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom. springing to the call of our brothers gone before, shouting the battle cry of freedom. They'll fill their vacant ranks with 1,000,000 freemen more, shouting the battle cry of freedom. The Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah! Down with the traitor and up with the star. We will rally round the flag, boys, rally once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom. We will welcome to our numbers the loyal, true, and brave, shouting the battle cry of freedom. And though they may be poor, not a man will be a slave, shouting the battle cry of freedom. The Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah! Down with the bagster, up with the star. We will rally round the flag, boys, rally once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom. Thank you, thank you.
Paul, I have to say, just looking here at the live chat, that was definitely a hit performance, my friend. Very well done. It's
Thank you.
I fills the heart with joy listening to good music with a good message. Next, the moment we have all been waiting for, the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Caleb Boppin.
Hello. How's everyone doing tonight? Wow. Well, this has been great. This has been great. I really enjoyed the cultural performances and speeches, and I'm still kind of reeling from that battle cry of freedom that we just heard from Paul. I thought I might begin my remarks by talking just a little bit about the importance of what is going on in India, because India is a very, very big country. Right? We don't know that. It doesn't get shown on American television very much. It gets kind of overlooked. But India has the second largest industrial working class in the entire world. Only China has a larger industrial working class than India. And India is a country that has been through many struggles in its history. It was a country that suffered at the hands of the British imperialists. At the time that the British conquered India, it was having some of the greatest cloth and silk manufacturing in the world. They had beautiful looms. When the British Empire went to India, they didn't immediately put the people of India to work using those looms to make cloth for the empire. Instead, they burned the textile mills down, and they burned the looms, and they forced the people of India, this proud nation that had been weaving for thousands of years before the British ever did, forced them to import their cloth from British manufacturers. And this goes to show that this myth that we get from the capitalists, that they are bringing development to the world, that they are the ones raising people out of poverty, that they're bringing economic development. This is a myth. This is a lie. The British didn't go to India to civilize it, to industrialize it. No, the British went there to destroy its economy. The British went there to reinforce the system of caste oppression, the caste system. The British went there to incite Muslims and Hindus against each other and foment ethnic divisions. The British went there to reinforce the oppression of women and other patriarchal and traditional structures that have oppressed people in India for thousands of years. The British held back the development and modernization of India. And it was the fight of the Indian people for independence that caused so much progress to take place in India. India never had a socialist revolution. It did break free from the British. It did establish its independence, but it never became a fully socialist country. During the Cold War, India had a government that was not a socialist government, but it was Soviet aligned. It was what you could call a popular front government. And that popular front government, in which the Communist Party, it had a role, it had elected representatives, was forced to make many concessions to the workers. One of the concessions that they made in India was that the farmers of India, instead of selling their products directly to agribusiness corporations, they would sell their products to the government of India. And then the government would sell it to the corporations. And this way, the price of agricultural products, of produce, could be regulated and inflated. And this would be a subsidy to India's millions and millions of farmers. And that policy, that came about as a result of mass organizing and struggle by communists and progressives in India. At the time, they had a Soviet-aligned Popular Front government. That policy has been in effect until now. And it's the government of Modi, a reactionary, a Hindu nationalist who came to power inciting Hindus against Muslims. He has moved in a neoliberal direction, and he is stripping away this subsidy to the farmers in India. And so the struggle that began now in India, it started with the farmers who took to the streets and marched, and they said, you're not going to take away this subsidy. You're not going to force us to directly sell our products to Monsanto for whatever price they want to pay. And it was the Indian farmers that took to the streets, and then behind them came the labor unions, and now the entire people seem to be involved in a revolutionary struggle against neoliberalism. Modi claims that he is a nationalist. His party, the BJP, they call themselves Hindu nationalists, and he claims that he is fighting for the people of India. He claims that he represents the people of India. He's similar to the new right in Europe. He's similar to Donald Trump in the United States, where he'll have rhetoric sometimes against globalism, rhetoric against the IMF and the World Trade Organization. However, when push comes to shove, India, under the leadership of Modi, has entered a geopolitical alliance with the US imperialists against China. Modi and Donald Trump are good friends. And because of that, because Modi has entered this alliance with the imperialists and joined their campaign and their trade war against China, he is now having his arm twisted. And he might claim to be a nationalist. He might claim to be fighting for the people of India, but he is engaging in neoliberal cutbacks and reforms. He is selling the people of India down the river. He's inciting racist and ethnic bigotry in order to try and do it. But what we're seeing right now is that the people of India have had enough, and they are giving great inspiration to the peoples of the entire world. I want to thank Chana, who's from the Communist Party of India, Marxist, for his very powerful statement. I'm really, really glad that we were able to have that statement. I want to thank Charlotte in particular for arranging for that statement to be recorded so it could be broadcast here today. And that was just really, really important. And while the mainstream media is ignoring it, while synthetic left outlets like Jacobin are dumping all over it and telling us the Indian left is failing, the people of India and the communists of India, whether they be from the Communist Party of India, Marxist, the regular Communist Party, or the Socialist Unity Center, they are leading the way, and they are paving the trail ahead. And we should all be looking to the people of India and the struggle of the workers in India for what we can learn from it as they lead the way as we march ahead into the 2020s, which are looking already to be a decade of great difficulty, but also a decade of great potential. And, I'm known for being somewhat optimistic. I get on here and I feel that I have a responsibility as a revolutionary to be optimistic. I personally feel that it is the responsibility of any socialist or progressive to be optimistic. There is way too much material that comes out in the name of socialism and Marxism that is full of hopelessness, full of darkness, full of pessimism, says there is no hope. In my mind, you can't really call yourself a socialist and have that worldview. That socialism, scientific socialism, Marxism, dialectical materialism is a philosophy rooted in optimism. It is rooted in the belief that through the struggle of classes and through the contradiction of material forces, we can get to a higher stage of being, a higher mode of production. It is a fundamentally optimistic ideology. I will never forget the very, very old man I had the honor of working with years ago. He was a member of a political party that I was also a member of. And he was an older man, and he died. And I remember at the memorial, they talked about how every time you saw this older man, he always had a smile on his face. And he always had good news to tell you, right? This older man, he lived in New York City. He was originally from Brooklyn. He lived in Manhattan. He was of Jewish heritage, but every day he wore a Palestine baseball cap. And every time you saw him, he would tell you about how he had been on the subway and a young person had come up to him and given him a thumbs up or told him that they loved the Palestine baseball cap that he wore. He would distribute communist newspapers to newsstands all over Manhattan. And every time you saw him, he would tell you about a new newsstand that was carrying a communist newspaper or a new person he had just given the communist publication to, and how excited he was about somebody he had gotten to sit down and read Marx with him and study the Communist Manifesto. He understood that even though there's a lot of negativity out there, even though there were probably plenty of people who said negative things to him about that Palestine baseball cap, even though there were plenty of people that probably told him to go screw himself when he tried to hand them the communist newspaper, he didn't tell us about those things. When we saw him, he gave us optimistic messages. He told us the good news. He gave us what we needed to hear to inspire us to keep organizing and fighting back. And it's that kind of spirit, that kind of attitude that is needed in the revolutionary movement. More than ever, people in our generation, in such dark times as we live in, they need to be hearing positive messages. They need to be hearing messages of hope and inspiration. And there is too much pessimism and too much darkness in our movement. And I view the Center for Political Innovation as a vehicle through which hope and optimism and revolutionary joy can once again be spread, because this is what our generation and this is what our working class, most especially here in the United States, but all across the world, needs in this dark hour in which a pandemic has exposed the evil of a system where profits come before people. And while the rich get taken care of, so many have been left behind. We know about the mass unemployment that is taking place here in the United States. We know about the fact that households all across this country are food insecure, that there's desperation going on. We also know what's happened in Africa, how there's a crisis of malnutrition right now in Africa, spawned by this pandemic. We know what has happened in different corners of the globe, where this pandemic has left so many working people behind. And we also know that the socialist countries, like China, like Vietnam, like Cuba, like Venezuela, where the banks, factories, and industries and major centers of economic power don't simply function according to what's profitable, but are instead forced to work in the interest of all of society, they've handled the pandemic much better. They've made sure that people have what they need. They've organized society. They've made sure healthcare is available. It is pretty obvious, if you look at it, that capitalism is not a system that serves public good. It's pretty obvious if you look at a situation like this pandemic, that socialism is a superior mode of production to capitalism. This pandemic has laid that bare and made it blatantly obvious. And now we have, the far right and the demagogic voices trying to blame China for the pandemic, trying to say the pandemic was all a big Chinese conspiracy. Why are they reduced to saying that? They're reduced to saying that because everyone can see that even though the whole world got the pandemic, after China did, China got it before anyone else. China handled this far, far better than the Western capitalist countries did. Vietnam handled it far, far better. The Kerala area in India, the province run by the Communist Party of India, Marxist, they handled it far, far better. The countries like Cuba and Venezuela, even though they faced crushing sanctions and weren't able to import key medical goods, they handled it better. Capitalism, a system that says you're on your own, you're on your own, you have no relation to anyone else, individualism above all else, no sense of collective duty, profits come first, a rat race for who can get the biggest billionaire profits at the expense of everybody else. That system has completely fallen on its face in 2020. And as we head to 2021, I think what has been laid bare by this pandemic is going to become more and more obvious to many, many people. This pandemic may very well be a moment that people look back on in the future. I want to talk about sometimes there are moments like this. Sometimes there are key moments that they're not revolutionary moments, because we're not having a revolution right now. There's no revolution here in the United States. There's no revolution going on around the world. Sometimes there are moments that are not revolutionary moments, but they're moments of awakening. They're pre-revolutionary moments where the consciousness of the people awakens. And because of this consciousness, people suddenly begin to move in the direction that eventually a revolution can come about. A great example of that would be 1972 in Nicaragua. Now, Nicaragua is a country in Central America, and in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, it had a brutal military dictator backed up by the United States called Somoza. Somoza was the dictator. He allowed Nicaragua to remain impoverished and underdeveloped, mass illiteracy, mass homelessness. He worked for Wall Street and for the Pentagon. He was a puppet of Western capitalism. And there was a horrendous earthquake in Nicaragua. And this earthquake took place and it killed 11,000 people and it left 300,000 people homeless. And at that point, Nicaragua's population was only 2.8 million people. So among a population of 2.8 million people, 300,000 people being homeless, that's massive. So this earthquake left Nicaragua in shambles. So all around the world, many countries donated very generously to the people of Nicaragua to help them out. There was a baseball player from the United States who was raising money and eventually died in a plane crash. And the government of the United States gave millions of dollars to Nicaragua, and people all across the planet donated money to help the people of Nicaragua. And in the aftermath of this earthquake that left so many people behind, and all this money was donated, the money that was donated to help people in the aftermath of this earthquake was stolen. The Somoza dictatorship, backed up by the United States, was so corrupt in its response to the earthquake that all this money that had been raised to help the people of Nicaragua that had been left homeless was stolen and squandered away and handed out among the wealthy aristocrats and the landowners and the plutocrats of Nicaragua, and the people of Nicaragua didn't get the help that they needed. And it was in that moment that the consciousness of the people of Nicaragua suddenly expanded. And that moment in 1972, when a natural disaster was so badly mishandled and the aid that was meant for the people of Nicaragua was squandered and mysteriously stolen and handed off to a bureaucratic capitalist regime, it was in that moment that Nicaragua began to move toward a socialist revolution. In Nicaragua, there was an organization called the Sandinistas. They were named after a national hero of Nicaragua, and they weren't part of the Communist Party. They were a left-wing Marxist reading group. Some of them were Christians. Some of them were Maoists. Some of them were Marxist-Leninists. They were just a group of people in Nicaragua who opposed capitalism. And they were an illegal organization. And they actually had a newspaper, and it was called Issue 1, Volume 1. And the reason it was called that is because every time they printed a new edition of it, the government would outlaw it. So it became a new newspaper every time they published it, right? They would give it a name, they publish Issue 1, Volume 1, and the government would outlaw it. So then they would have to start a whole new newspaper and publish Issue 1, Volume 1, and the government would outlaw it. And then they'd start a new newspaper. And so that their newspaper was called Issue 1, Volume 1, jokingly, because every time they published it, they had to have a new name because the government would outlaw it. And they were a Marxist reading group, and they were not in the Communist Party of Nicaragua. And because of that, actually, the CIA, thinking that maybe they could be used, right? The CIA had this whole program of giving money to leftists who were possibly anti-communist or anti-Soviet. The CIA gave them a little bit of money here and there and said, let's try to build up this group of Nicaraguans who are against the Communist Party. But after the earthquake, 1972, as the people of Nicaragua got into a more revolutionary mood, it became pretty clear that the communists of Nicaragua, the people of Nicaragua that wanted a revolution, were going into the Sandinista organization, and that they were actually probably more representative and more pro-Soviet, more pro-Cuba, more anti-imperialist than the existing Communist Party was. And in 1979, they eventually took power, and they became the government of Nicaragua, the Sandinista government. And they took power in 1979. They began redistributing land. They brought in literacy volunteers from Cuba to teach people to read. They had Cuba set up healthcare clinics to provide healthcare to the people of Nicaragua, free healthcare and education for the population. And in response to that, the United States, first under Jimmy Carter, but then especially under Ronald Reagan, started funding terrorists called the Contras. And the Contras were shipped into Nicaragua. They were given guns and weapons by the US CIA to burn healthcare clinics, to assassinate people, to execute literacy volunteers. And there was a huge amount of international outrage. There were many Catholic priests and nuns who were supporters of the Sandinistas. And often these Contras would murder priests and nuns. And in response to that, the Catholic Church started to oppose the U.S. government in sending these terrorists to Nicaragua. And all across the United States, there were big protests and demonstrations in solidarity with Nicaragua, calling for the U.S. government to stop funding the Contra terrorists that were trying to overturn the Nicaraguan revolution. And it got to the point that the U.S. Congress was forced, because of so many protests in Europe, so many protests from the Vatican, so many protests on college campuses in the United States, so much international awareness about the horrendous crimes that the Contras were committing, that the U.S. Congress passed a law that no more money could be given to the Contra terrorists of Nicaragua. It was actually illegal. So the right wing and the Republicans started fundraising on their own and raising money on their own in order to give money to the Contras of Nicaragua, because a law was passed that no U.S. government money could be given to them. What's also interesting is that you can talk about the roots of ID poll and identity politics and imperialism. As the CIA was scrambling to try and give money to the Contras of Nicaragua in their effort to bring down the Sandinista government, but it couldn't get U.S. government money anymore because of the law, they recruited Russell Means, the leader of the American Indian movement. And they had Russell Means go to Nicaragua and make propaganda claiming that the Sandinista government of Nicaragua was racist, that it was oppressing indigenous people, and try to manipulate, in the name of identity politics, manipulate leftists and supporters of indigenous rights to support the terrorist campaign against the government of Nicaragua. It was very horrendous, the civil war that was waged in Nicaragua. But yet, at the same time, this horrendous civil war was going on in Nicaragua. They reduced illiteracy in the country from 50% to 12% with Cuban volunteers. And they really, despite all that they were waging in the middle of the civil war, this economic blockade, with the CIA bombing their harbors, with Contra terrorists, tearing apart the country, they did a lot to really improve people's lives. Finally, in 1990, they had an election in Nicaragua, and the Sandinistas lost the election. And so they stepped down. But in 2006, they were voted back into office. And now the Sandinista government, the FSLN, they are the leaders of Nicaragua. They are the socialist party that runs Nicaragua. And the slogan that they have picked for their socialist government, that is spray painted, and not just spray painted, but painted up on billboards and posters all over the country of Nicaragua, the slogan is Christianity, socialism, and solidarity. And it's very, very fascinating that the government of Nicaragua has combined Christian teachings with Marxism and with indigenous religions. And they have built these trees of life to celebrate the indigenous tradition of lighting up trees. It is kind of amazing what they've achieved. When you want to talk about the government of Nicaragua today, the Sandinista government, they have a network of what they call citizen power councils that they have built. And so every neighborhood, every community, every apartment building, every village has a citizens power council that coordinates the population and pushes the goals of the Sandinistas and the socialist revolution. They decreased poverty by 30% from 2005 to 2016. The GDP, that's the gross domestic product of Nicaragua, went up by 36% from 2007 to 2016. Illiteracy has been completely wiped out in Nicaragua by the Sandinista government. And they actually have what they call an entrepreneur program, a micro-entrepreneur program, where they help Nicaraguans to open their own businesses with loans from the socialist government. They help Nicaraguans maybe they weave baskets, or they make clothing, or they make shoes. They help them to start their own business with a subsidy from the socialist government, a business that is part of their centrally planned economy. And that the socialist government of Nicaragua is one of the successes of socialism. It is a society that, if you compare it to Guatemala, which is a free market country under the dominion of Wall Street, if you compare it to Honduras, a country that had a socialist leader who was overthrown in 2009 and has been in a state of ruin and chaos ever since, if you compare it to Haiti or the Dominican Republic, Nicaragua is doing very, very well. They have eradicated illiteracy. They have wiped out poverty. They have given people hope. They have given people their own land. They have had huge achievements, and they have very much been working with the People's Republic of China, with Venezuela, with Cuba, as part of the global anti-imperialist bloc. And Nicaragua is a country in Central America that has experienced all this transformation. All this transformation has happened in Nicaragua, but it all started. The moment that it started was with an earthquake where so many people were left homeless and suffering, and all the aid and relief that was sent was squandered by the government. And it was that dark moment, that moment of fear and hopelessness and just utter disgust with the corrupt old regime. It was that 1972 earthquake that started the process through which Nicaragua became a socialist country. It's very, very interesting to think about. You know, many people have noted that these Contra terrorists that were backed by the United States to go through Nicaragua and murder people are also the individuals who started bringing cocaine and eventually invented crack, right? And the drug called crack, the horrendous drug that has destroyed so many lives. And the epidemic of cocaine in the 1980s can be traced back to the CIA and Wall Street's funding of these Contra terrorists in Nicaragua. So what went on in Nicaragua and the whole history of struggle there is intimately tied in with the struggle here in the United States. And I think that what happened with that earthquake has a lesson for us, those of us who are interested in socialism here in the United States, and those of us who are thinking about the potential of this very dark moment that we're in globally. But I have another example. To point to. Because, as you know, the Christmas holiday has just ended. And this time of year, you can't go into a store, you can't turn on the TV, you can't turn on the radio without hearing Christmas carols and Christmas music. It's everywhere. Well, there's one particular Christmas carol, one particular Christmas song that most of us have probably heard at some point in our lives. It's an old one. It was actually written in 1857, and it's called "We Three Kings." And it's supposed to be about the three kings who visited Christ or whatnot upon his birth, upon the nativity. But that song was not written, thousands of years ago. That song was written in 1857. And it was written for a big Christmas pageant in New York City in 1857. And there's a particular line in the chorus of that song that is rather relevant to what we're talking about today. So the chorus of that song, it has a line in it. It says, "Westward leading, still proceeding, guide us to the perfect light." Now, at the time that was written, that was understood to be a popular reference. In 1857 in New York City, there was a newspaper called the New York Tribune. And it was a newspaper that eventually hired Karl Marx as its London correspondent. And the editor of the New York Tribune was Horace Greeley. And Horace Greeley was a very well-known abolitionist. He was opposed to slavery. He was a progressive. And not only was he opposed to slavery, but he was a socialist. He was not a Marxist, but he was a friend of Karl Marx, hired Karl Marx for his newspaper. And he was very much interested in utopian socialism. And he led many big protests and demonstrations against slavery. And he was famous for a catchphrase that he had, which was called, "Go West, young man." And that was what he was known for. Everyone knew Horace Greeley, the editor of the New York Tribune here in New York City, the friend of Karl Marx. Everyone knew him for the phrase, "Go West, young man." So in 1857, when this new song was written for this new Christmas pageant in New York City, and the chorus included the line, "Westward leading, still proceeding, guide us to the perfect light," that was very widely understood to be an allusion to Horace Greeley and his abolitionist, utopian socialist movement in the United States. And of course, this was happening at a time in the United States where there was an awakening among the population. Now, many people, if you go to school, you learn history, you probably will hear something about, they talk about before the American Revolution, there was what they called the Great Awakening. And this was a moment in US history where prior to the American Revolution, there was a widespread awakening of religious revival sentiments and an opposition to the British Empire among the population of the colonies, the Great Awakening. Well, many people then will go on to talk about how in the 1840s and 50s, before the Civil War that came in the 1860s, there was a mass movement in the United States called the Second Great Awakening. And that movement was in full swing in 1857 when We Three Kings was written. And Horace Greeley was very much identified with it. And what was happening during the Second Great Awakening was you had a mass movement of religious revivalism in the United States that was in opposition to slavery. There was a feeling that slavery was hurting the United States. Slavery was a violation of Christian teachings. Slavery was tied in with the big bankers that ran the British Empire. It was un-American. It was in opposition to the freedom and the values the United States had been founded upon. And millions of people across the United States were rallying as part of this Second Great Awakening to overturn slavery and also to give women the right to vote. That was one thing that was raised by the Second Great Awakening. They thought women should have the right to vote. Furthermore, many members of the Second Great Awakening movement moved out westward to places like Illinois and Ohio and Pennsylvania to start utopian socialist communities. There are many of the religious groups that are very big in the United States now can trace their roots back to the Second Great Awakening. Seventh-day Adventism comes out of the Great Awakening. Christian Science comes out of the Great Awakening, or the Second Great Awakening. Mormonism comes out of the Great Awakening. And it's rather interesting that, in addition, we know about the song We Three Kings that has the line about westward leading, still proceeding, guide us to the perfect light. One of the hymns of Mormonism, right, which was also very strongly opposed to slavery, actually had an armed grouping at one point that shot and killed slave owners at one point in the early years of the Mormon Church. They actually, one of their hymns, they had the line, this is, the hymn, Come, Come, Ye Saints, which was one of the early hymns of the Mormons. They said, we'll find the place that God himself prepared far away in the west, where none shall come to hurt or make afraid. There the saints shall be blessed. We'll make the air with music breathe, shout praises to our God and King. All is well, all is well. And it was, the idea was that the United States was a country founded on values that were opposed to slavery, and slavery could be abolished, and that Americans could move further westward and begin to build utopian or socialistic communities, right? Frederick Engels wrote his very important book, Socialism, Utopian and Scientific, polemicizing and arguing that you can't just build an isolated community out in the woods and build a socialist society, that socialism will emerge from the struggle between classes. But Marx praised the utopian movement and saw that the utopians, like Robert Owen, like Horace Greeley, like others, they made a great contribution, not just in the fact that they were experimenting with how to build a socialist society in parts of the United States that were previously unsettled, but also talking about how slavery needed to be abolished, talking about the rights of women. So that particular line, westward leading, still proceeding, guide us to the perfect light, from We Three Kings, refers to a period that was a lot like what happened in Nicaragua in 1972. It was a moment of awakening where people were becoming angry at the old order. And it was the Second Great Awakening in the United States that eventually laid the basis for what Marxists call the Second American Revolution, or the Civil War, right? The Civil War was a moment where the slave system of the South was overthrown. And as much as we have all been bored, whenever they talked about the Civil War in history class, all of us got bored. If you ever watch, movies by Ken Burns, you just want to go to sleep. They're just really, really boring, right? The Civil War has just been made really, really boring. But the Civil War was not boring. The Civil War was a revolution. Harriet Tubman became the first woman to ever lead U.S. soldiers into battle. And in South Carolina, she had an army of guerrilla fighters that went up and down the Combahee River, liberating slave plantations and giving guns to formerly enslaved people to be revolutionaries, right? During the Civil War, there was actually a communist division of the U.S. Army. It was called the Ohio 9th Infantry Regiment, or Die Neuner. And it was German Americans who had been followers of Karl Marx, and they formed their own division of the army. August Willich, who was a Marxist, an associate of Karl Marx, he rose up the ranks. He became a brigadier general. Joseph Wedemeyer was a commander of the U.S. military, and he was awarded for his efforts. And that after the Civil War, during the period of Reconstruction, there was land redistribution in the South. There was public education given in many parts of the South, and there was an effort to bring the white working class people of the South and the formerly enslaved people together in order to roll back the power of the plantation owners. But that was all overturned. We know about the Ku Klux Klan, and we know about the betrayal of Reconstruction, and that was all overturned. But briefly, coming out of the Civil War, you could see one of the most progressive moments in U.S. history. Now, and let's not forget that during that Second Great Awakening, it was in 1859, before the Civil War had happened, but during that upsurge of anti-slavery and progressive sentiments in American history, that John Brown launched his great raid on Harper's Ferry in 1859, and tried to spark a revolt against slavery throughout the South. He was betrayed, and some people try to say that John Brown was an adventurist or he acted in isolation. But the reality is that John Brown was so popular. When they hung John Brown, they had to practically send the entire U.S. Army to surround the gallows to make sure that no one came and freed him, because John Brown was so widely loved. All the great thinkers at the time were supporting John Brown. Henry David Thoreau was an admirer of John Brown. Many great thinkers and intellectuals, many church congregations, many people throughout the United States, many labor unionists supported John Brown's efforts. And though he failed, he had a widespread amount of support for what he did in 1859. So there are moments when people are awakening and their consciousness is changing. And this is the kind of thing that can lead up to the possibility of going from one system to another, right? We talk about what happened in 1972 in Nicaragua. We talk about the Second Great Awakening in the United States and how it led to the eventual Civil War that overturned slavery. I think that right now in the United States, we are in a period that I could call accurately the Great Socialist Awakening in American history. Right now, all throughout the United States, millions of people are becoming interested in socialism. Socialism, according to polls, is popular with about half of people under the age of 30. Communism is becoming more popular. The writings of Karl Marx are being more widely studied. Bernie Sanders was an obscure congressman from Vermont. He was a national figure who, if it weren't for the meddling of the Democratic National Committee, probably would have won the Democratic the nomination for president in 2016 and in 2020. So all throughout the United States, the consciousness of the population is changing. And this pandemic and the response to it has only escalated that process, I am convinced. But at the same time that there is so much interest in socialism in the United States, there is a lack of understanding of basic socialist concepts. There is a huge amount of confusion. Lily did a great job addressing one of the big points of confusion. People think socialism is simply worker cooperatives. But there are other points of confusion. There are folks who think socialism is the post office, or socialism is the fire department. Socialism is when the government does stuff. There are people who think that the countries around the world, like Cuba and Venezuela and the Soviet Union and Nicaragua and China, that have built socialism in the past, shouldn't be studied. We shouldn't try to learn anything from them. There are people who think the opposite and think we should blindly adhere to an ideology from one of those countries and try to, cut and paste the socialism of Cuba or Venezuela or Korea into the United States. There's so much confusion about socialism, but there's a moment where there's so much interest in it. And the purpose of the Center for Political Innovation is to try and guide this conversation about socialism and try and guide it in a way that can actually change things. And as we move ahead, we want to move toward having actual in real life events as this pandemic breaks and as we are, seeing health code restrictions lifted. We also want to move toward publishing more books. We've published the Green Book of Muammar Gaddafi. We published a book that I put together on Kamala Harris. But currently, there's someone in Louisiana who is working on publishing a Center for Political Innovation edition of The Foundations of Christianity by Karl Kautsky. There is talk of reprinting the writings of Gus Hall, a great communist leader in U.S. history, and if we can arrange and get the copyrights in order, republishing some of Gus Hall's more important writings on the Communist Party and its history and the movement for socialism in the United States. We were talking about putting out our own edition of Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific by Frederick Engels. We have a lot of things in the works, and we get contacted. I get contacted by people all the time. The consciousness right now in the United States is vastly expanding, and the amount of people who are interested in what we are doing is vastly, vastly expanding. And I would argue that as we try to guide this awakening consciousness in the United States, that we have roughly two key ideological competitors. There are two schools of thought that we should try to counter and refute and win young people away from. The first school that we need to combat is called libertarianism. Libertarianism is a philosophy, it's a viewpoint, it's widely believed here in the United States that there's nothing wrong with capitalism. That here in the United States, the problem isn't capitalism, the problem is that we have not real capitalism. I'm sure you've encountered this, right? Now, libertarianism isn't just wrong, okay? It's not simply incorrect, because this is real capitalism if we've ever seen it. Profits are definitely in command of the US economy. Production for profit, an economy organized to make profits for private owners, that's capitalism. The United States is capitalism. But libertarianism is far, far more dangerous than simply being wrong, right? People can be wrong. The reason that libertarianism is so dangerous is because libertarianism brings with it a very poisonous philosophy, right? If you look at not simply the economic policies advocated by libertarians, right? Libertarians want to privatize the school system and break the teachers' union. So teachers get lower wages and lower benefits. Public schools are charter schools for profit. Libertarians want prisons for profit, right? Anything is better if the government doesn't do it, right? They want prisons to be privatized. They want more profits for the prison corporations. Libertarians are excited about private military contractors. Libertarians are excited about the governments locally not having enough money for paved roads. And they're excited about cutting the taxes on the rich. They're excited about cutting back public services like food stamps. But if you look past simply the policies that they advocate, it's the philosophy libertarians advocate that is the most deadly. You look into Ayn Rand, right? The philosopher, the woman who invented the philosophy of objectivism. Ayn Rand pushes the notion that kindness and compassion and all kinds of human solidarity is a weakness, right? That she argues that one should simply be self-interested. She actually has a book called The Virtue of Selfishness, right? Ayn Rand pushes a very, very sinister worldview. There's a book called The Fountainhead. It was a novel she published. And in the novel The Fountainhead, the hero, Howard Rourke, he's this architect and he's non-conforming. No one, he builds buildings and designs them in like unconforming ways or whatnot. And he's a hero because the rest of the world doesn't understand him. He's this great individual. But there's a particularly ugly scene in The Fountainhead where Howard Rourke, the hero, breaks into the apartment of a woman and violently rapes her. And Ayn Rand's narration portrays it as somehow being a good thing, because this powerful man is asserting his will. This is the kind of morality that is being pushed by libertarianism. It leads to a philosophy that says might is right, that it is okay to harm other people, that it is okay to prey on other people. If other people are suffering, they deserve to be suffering. The strength goes to the strong. And as much as libertarian economic policies are different than fascism, the mindset that you find in the writings of Ayn Rand or in the teachings of the internet guru Stefan Molyneux, this is a fascist philosophy. This is a philosophy that argues that human solidarity, kindness, and compassion are a weakness, and that certain people need to be put down. Certain people need to be suppressed and deprived, and that in order for society to flourish, you need to overall see, the suppression of some people. Libertarianism is very, very dangerous. It's extremely dangerous, but it feeds into the isolation that many young people in our country feel right now, right? This is a hard time. The holidays are a hard time. Why did they invent, Christmas? Why did they invent Yuletide? Why did they invent New Year's celebration? All of these things came into existence because the winter is a hard time. It's cold outside. It's dark, right? People generally kind of feel lonely. They feel sad, right? And the reason we have winter holidays is so that we can be connected with each other and we can have celebrations to try and deal with that. This is humanity dealing with the natural, seasonal change and how it affects us. So to have a situation where, during the winter season, people have to socially isolate or socially distance, right? It is compounding these problems. And there are so many young people out there that are interested in socialism or interested in opposing the government, opposing the status quo, but they do it in isolation. They do it on the internet. And this particularly vile philosophy of libertarianism feeds into their isolation. It tells them that they're isolated because the world just doesn't understand them. They're a great man. They're the motor of the world. They're a Howard Rourke. And if they can just learn to be more selfish and more cruel, if they can learn to reject solidarity, to reject kindness and compassion, they can somehow be more powerful. When you look at the evils of Ayn Rand or libertarianism, you're really forced to think of a line from the Communist Manifesto. Karl Marx, he wrote about the bourgeoisie, it compels nations on pain of extinction to adopt its mode of production. It compels them to introduce what it calls civilization into their midst. It compels them to become bourgeois themselves. In one word, it creates the world after its own image. And really, libertarianism is an effort on the part of the ruthless, self-interested, antisocial capitalist bosses to teach the youth of America, the working people of America, to think like them, to be ruthless like them, to lack solidarity like them, to reject human brotherhood and collectivism like them. But I am convinced that there are many young people who have been wrapped up in this demonic lie called libertarianism, who could become socialists, who could become Marxists, who could become revolutionaries. And that leads me to what I think is our second primary ideological opponent in this time, which is synthetic leftism, right? What we preach on here, what we talk about, what we study, Marxism, Leninism, the tradition of socialism, whether it come from, Bolivarian traditions, Ba'athist Arab socialism, socialism with Chinese characteristics, what we push, the leftist philosophy, is totally contrary to a school of thought that has sprung up on the internet and elsewhere that is very popular these days. There's a school of thought that I would basically call synthetic leftism. And while what we preach here is very, very optimistic and excited about the future, while what we preach here is about bringing people together, this is a philosophy and a viewpoint that is very pessimistic. It says the world is falling apart. There are too many people in the world. We're all using up too many resources. The environment is being polluted. We have to reduce the human population. We're headed for some big ecological disaster, number one. And it says that the way to build a better world is by tearing people down, right? We need people to reduce their consumption and have less. We need people who have a little bit of privilege in life to be shamed and beaten down and made to feel guilty. And that the way to improve the world is through destruction and reduction, and they have a dark view of the world. Now, this is not Marxism. This is a very dark, pessimistic school of thought. It is about destruction. But many people see it and they think that it's Marxism. It calls itself socialism. It calls itself Marxism. But what they believe is fundamentally in opposition to what we believe. Look, we know climate change is a reality. Climate change is not a hoax. It is a fact. However, the solution to climate change is human progress, invention, getting beyond fossil fuels. If someone is wanting to stop global warming, they should be very, very, very excited about what China is doing right now with fusion energy research. China is making great strides toward getting us off of carbon emissions and greenhouse gases, right? And the answer to climate change is human progress. It's new inventions. It's new discoveries. It's new modes of production. It's organizing the economy in a rational way so that we use resources strategically, thinking about the long term rather than just what's in the short interests of profits. The answer to the ecological problems is historical progress. It's moving forward. But that is not the view that you get from the prevailing voices in the environmental movement. The view you get from them is that human beings are a cancer on Mother Earth. Nature is out of balance. We need some mass act of destruction to restore the order to the planet. And on top of that, you get a message that there are some people that just have it too good, right? And that there are people that have it too good because of where they live or what their ancestry is or their gender or whatnot. And rather than understanding that the answer is to bring everyone up by giving special attention to those who have suffered the most, giving special attention to people who suffer on the part of their race or part of their gender identity or their sexual orientation or whatnot, or their national origin or whatnot, instead of arguing that the answer is to bring everyone up and give special attention to those who have suffered the most, their emphasis is on rather that we need to tear people down and that is the way to correct things. And it is a pessimistic school of thought. And many of the young people, I'm convinced, who get caught up in libertarianism have looked at Marxism and socialism, and they've not heard the kind of things that we're talking about here. Instead, what they've heard is the message of the synthetic left. They've heard this destructive message, this message that says people have it too good, we need to tear things down, there is no hope, we need to shame people. They see that, and they think Marxism is unattractive. They think Marxism is a hateful, destructive, pessimistic identity politics movement. And so because of that, they turn to this very, very sinister school of thought called libertarianism. But what does libertarianism offer? Why would someone become a libertarian? Well, libertarianism has within it, despite all of its flaws and evil, it does emphasize the aspirations of the small business owner. Libertarianism emphasizes working hard and getting ahead. It emphasizes the American dream. It says that you can start a small business and you can make millions of dollars and you don't want the government to get in your way. It appeals to optimism. And that is what makes it deadly. It appeals to the optimism that people have because leftism has become a movement dominated by pessimism. It is libertarianism and the right wing that has co-opted optimism. And essentially, what is needed in our time, if we're going to get out of the mess that we're in, what is needed in our time is we need a socialism that destroys the pessimism and the darkness of the synthetic left, but also destroys the sociopathy and the individualism and the demonic, greedy nature of the libertarian movement, and instead creates an optimistic, constructive, hopeful socialism. That is what is needed in our time. And that is what only the Center for Political Innovation can offer. Only we can offer this, right? The synthetic left has it wrong. The libertarians have it wrong. Only we can offer this. We have a special project that we are carrying out. And it's not an activist project. I'm not organizing demonstrations. It's not an electoral project. People want to vote and run for office and campaign. That's their business, but I'm not involved in that, and neither is the Center for Political Innovation. This is an ideological project. This is about pushing the socialist movement into a new direction and getting the socialist movement to change course so that it could actually capture the imagination of the American people. Folks, I want to just end by highlighting or re-highlighting one of the points that I made on a recent live, which is about ideology. Why is ideology important? A lot of people will tell you that ideology is not important. All that matters is whether we're in the streets, we're protesting, we just got to build the movement, right? Ideology is unimportant. Well, I'm going to tell you why ideology is important. Ideology is important for this simple reason. Imagine that you're driving down the road. Imagine that you're in your car and you're driving down the road. When you're driving down the road, you know where you came from, you know where you're going, and you know how you're getting there. That's ideology. But now I want you to imagine that you're driving down the road and suddenly you get struck with amnesia or something and you don't know where you're going and you don't know where you came from. In fact, you don't even know how you're getting there. What would you do in that moment? You would panic, right? You would stop the car. You couldn't keep going someplace if you didn't know where you were going or how you were getting there, didn't know where you were coming from. Ideology is what tells us where we came from, tells us where we're going, and it tells us how we're getting there. And for many years, for the majority of US history, people were given a, forgive me for swearing, a bullshit ideology, right? We were told that this is the greatest country in the world. And if anyone doesn't agree with that, they must be brainwashed. It's the greatest country in the world, the freest country in the world. All other countries want to be just like the United States. We have the best system that anyone's ever had. We're the most free anyone's ever had. If you don't like it here, you should move to another country. This is a bullshit ideology. Well, now millions of Americans are waking up to realize this is a bullshit ideology. It is, right? It's not true. The United States was founded on slavery and the genocide of Native Americans. The United States has waged ugly wars that have murdered people. 1950s and 60s, we had the highest standard of living in the world, but all those houses and cars and TV sets and hula hoops were dripping in blood. The blood of the Vietnamese people, the blood of the Korean people, the blood of the African Americans who were living under Jim Crow, the blood of the Chicano people who were made to basically feel as second-class citizens and function as second-class citizens in their own land. The blood of the indigenous people who were slaughtered in mass, that the United States, in the mythology of the United States that, was discovered by Christopher Columbus, who in 1492 sailed the ocean blue, and the Pilgrims, had a lovely dance party and just loved the Native Americans, and we all got along. This is all a mythology. It's a lie, and it's being refuted, and Americans know it's false. But instead of realizing that the ideology that they have is wrong and adopting a new socialist and anti-imperialist ideology, what has happened is millions of Americans have seen that the ideology that built this country is a lie. And instead of adopting a new ideology, they are simply told that there is no truth, that there is nothing to believe in, there is no hope for the future, that every cause is a lie, that every movement is a deception, that there is nothing you can really believe in. Everything is a con, everything is a hustle. And I believe it is that lack of ideology, the replacement of the American imperialist ideology with no ideology, with postmodernism. It's that is leading to the great crisis of mental health in the United States, right? Many young people in the United States, who perhaps their parents were raised to believe they were Americans and the descendants of pioneers who were, the most free in the world. Well, now many young people in the United States are growing up and saying, I don't know who I am. I don't know who I am. I don't know where I came from. I don't know where I'm going. And I don't really know what the point of life is. And that is the crisis facing the United States. And what we're here to say is you do have an identity. We can tell you who you are. You are carrying with you the heritage of John Brown and Harriet Tubman and Gus Hall and William Z. Foster and Huey Newton. You are carrying with you the legacy of Elizabeth Gurley Flynn. You are carrying with you the heritage of the abolitionist movement and the suffragist movement and the labor movement. You have an identity. You have an identity as a working class person. You have an identity as a progressive, as a person who has stood against these ugly wars, stood against discrimination, stood against the horrors of the capitalist system. You have an identity as a revolutionary, and you have a future. And that future is overturning the capitalist system and establishing a new society in the United States, building an entirely new America, a government of action that fights for working families. You have an identity. You have a road to go on. You know where you came from. You know where you're going, and you know how we're going to get there. That is the message of the Center for Political Innovation. And I think this country in 2021 is going to be more ripe than ever to hear this message of hope, optimism, and constructive socialism. So I thank you. That concludes my remarks.
Caleb, I want to thank you so much for an impassionate message, as always. Yeah, really, a round of applause for Caleb. Yes. and what you're saying about feeling a sense of identity and identification, you're right. There's not that in the United States, and people need to be able to feel a part of something, and we are a part of a long history of class struggle. Even you could even trace back to the slave revolutions of Spartacus and the Italian peninsula. With that, we need to move forward to our next segment, which is going to be our Q&A. I wanted to, before, there was a super chat towards the beginning of Caleb speaking, and it was from the user Huey Long. And it was a quote of Senator Huey Long. It's, "We have the farm problem, my friends, because we have too much cotton. We have a home loan problem because we have too many houses, and yet nobody can buy them and live in them." It's a good quote to reflect on. And then just a moment ago, we had a super chat from Red Illuminati, who has said we should take Trots seriously only when they accept responsibility for Irving Kristol, and even after that, we should still question their motives. I want to thank you all for that, as well as the just from Long Worn, just right now, $5 donation. Thank you so much. There's a request to have George Galloway on at some point. Caleb, maybe you could speak more to that.
There might be some questions from us. I think Lily has a question. So yours
Caleb, regarding India entering an alliance basically with the imperialists against China, how does that affect the BRICS economic alliance that they and China are both a part of?
Okay, so I guess, and by the way, other speakers are welcome to answer questions as well, and we'll be taking questions from the chat as well as questions from the from us here, and we'll just kind of do answer little bits here, I guess. So the question about George Galloway, I'd love to have George Galloway come on this channel or speak to the CPI. I think that would be great. I think he would make a great contribution. I have great admiration for George Galloway and his work. I thought the quote from Huey Long was pretty good. And yeah, I mean, that does raise questions about the BRICS. And I think that when Modi first came into office, some were a little bit optimistic that despite his history of racism, that he might be a little more anti-imperialist than his predecessors. But that is clearly not the case. And now the people of India are in revolt against him. So yeah. All right. Any other questions? Let's do other questions.
Caleb, I'd like if you could highlight as kind of leading CPI, how socialism will affect rural communities, specifically small family farms. Oh, you're muted, Caleb. It's
important to make clear that socialists are not opposed to personal property, right? When people read in Marx that he said he was opposed to private property, right? That referred only to things that are used to make profits, right? If you use it for your own personal use, your house, your car, that simply refers to your personal property. You're getting feedback. I think someone's here. There you go. I muted you, Keaton. But yeah, that personal property, things that you use for your own use, was not considered to be part of what Marx referred to when he talked about private property. Private property referred to the means of production. It referred to business property, etc. And I think that supporting small family farmers in the United States would be very important. Agribusiness corporations, I think, should be made public property, right? Agribusiness should be broken up, but I think the small family farmers should be supported, right? And I think that, at one point, the Communist Party of the United States actually advocated a workers and farmers government. Now, the small family farmers are not as big a factor in the U.S. economy as they once were. So I don't know if that slogan would necessarily be appropriate. But opposition, there's no opposition to small family farmers by any means. And I think the farmer and the worker, standing arm in arm against big capital is the future of working class America.
Thank you for that. It's always a bit. You know, when I'm talking, you know, I come from a family of farmers, 6 generations, and talking to other people about it who agree on things like breaking up Monsanto, nationalizing a lot of these agribusinesses. But one of the issues comes up of, well, is my 2,000-acre farm going to be nationalized? Is the 3 people who work here, is it going to be collectivized, and how exactly it's going to play out? And a lot of times I don't have the answer, and it's, you know, time will tell, but ultimately we know, regardless, it will be the benefit for society.
Very good. Are there more questions from the chat, or do other folks want to make a comment?
Actually, I do have a question. In regards to the reconstruction of our system, how do we deal with law enforcement and getting cops who haven't been like hypnotized by white supremacy?
Well, it's interesting because, you know, one of the slogans that's very popular now among left-wing activists is they'll say things like "abolish the police," and I don't think that's a good slogan. The reason I don't think it's a good slogan is because it doesn't make sense to people who are not already leftists. You know, the policing institutions in the United States, it's well understood that they started out, you know, with the slave-catching institutions, the paddy rollers, etc. There's a problematic culture that develops in police departments where they, you know, they view the communities that they police almost as an occupying army might view the population it's you know, occupying. In addition to that, you know, there are big problems with policing for profits, where you know, there's a lot of, you know, almost a military industrial complex of selling weapons to police departments. There's the prison for profit system where, you know, human beings are turned into commodities for private prison corporations. Plus, you can add to that that a way to subsidize Israel by the U.S. government has been basically hiring Israeli police to train American police. And so you have a whole program where police officers and police departments all across the United States are sent to Israel to get their training, and they're trained by the Israeli police to deal, you know, with people the way Israeli police deal with Palestinians. So because of that, all of these things have developed. Now, the reason that I don't think the slogan "abolish the police" is good is because it doesn't make sense to people. Most people, when they hear the slogan "abolish the police," they think, okay, so it's 3 a.m. and my house is being broken into. Who do I call? What do I do? Well, if you ask a socialist or a leftist, they'll generally say, oh, well, we will form this workers' committee or this workers' self-defense organization. So what you really mean is we need a new police force. And that is, I think, a very sensible thing. And it's very clear that the transition to socialism will require new institutions. You could not have socialism with the police forces as they currently exist. You would have to create a new kind of police force with a new kind of training, with a new, you know, the new mode of operation, rooted in communities, right? You would have to do that. That would be part of the process of building socialism, would be building a new police forces and a new military and maybe even a new constitution and a new Bill of Rights, and that socialism means transforming the state. When Karl Marx wrote that you cannot simply seize hold of the ready-made state machinery, he wrote that during the Paris Commune, he was referring to the fact that, yes, in the process of transforming, building a socialist society, you have to build a new state. You cannot simply have it be the old state with socialists in charge of it. This state was designed to accommodate capitalism and imperialism. So the process of socialism will mean building a new state. But that doesn't mean abolish the police. The people don't understand what that means. That means creating new institutions to serve that role, new institutions that are based in revolutionary and socialist values, based in the communities, that carry out this role in a very different way and actually serve the people. At the end of the day, what the police do is they protect property. Most of what they do is protect private property. I'll never forget a day that I was leafleting at a movie theater, right? In front of a movie theater. I think the movie Capitalism, A Love Story, Michael Moore's movie, was showing at this movie theater. So I was leafleting socialist leaflets outside the movie theater. And the police came. And, you know, the movie theater called the police to, like, make me leave or whatever. But I'll never forget how the police are supposed to represent the law, but the movie theater owner was telling the police what to tell me, right? And that just kind of classically like laid it out there, right? These are the police. They're supposed to be enforcing the law. But the movie theater owner came out with the police and said, okay, he can stand over here and all of that. And then the police just repeat back to me what the movie store owner said. Because at the end of the day, the police are protecting private property. That's why they function. And that's why the capitalist state was created. It was created to protect the property of the capitalists, just like the feudal state existed to protect the aristocracy and the landowners and the monarchy, right? And that we need a socialist police force. And it's very interesting. One thing I've noticed is the Wall Street Journal and a lot of academia in the United States, they've been running this whole thing about illiberalism and democratic regression. I don't know if people have seen this. It's a big theme among like academia and liberal academics. And they talk about how, Venezuela, they had an election and they elected Hugo Chavez and it was democratic regression. Why? Well, once he got elected, he changed the nature of the independent institutions. The police in Venezuela were changed in how they operated. The military in Venezuela was changed and started getting its training in Cuba. The way the business community functioned was changed. The way the media functioned was changed. And so they're arguing that Venezuela stopped being democratic, they argued, because when Hugo Chavez got in there, he changed the nature of independent institutions. And that this is a big theme, right? It's this argument that you can be democratic in the eyes of American imperialism as long as you get elected, but don't change anything. But if you get elected and you change the nature of the police, change the nature of the military, change the nature of the economy, they view that as democratic regression, and they call it illiberalism. And this is very interesting. And it kind of exposes this, that at the end of the day, they will always call communism dictatorship. Whenever socialists come to power, if they actually start to move towards socialism, they're going to call it dictatorship, because the way they see it, these independent institutions are independent when they serve capitalism, right? When the police serve the private property owners, when the military serves Wall Street, it's independent. But if a government gets elected and changes the nature of the police or changes the nature of the military or changes the nature of the economy, suddenly that's no longer independent. And so suddenly, even though the people voted for this and elected it, it's illiberalism. It's democratic regression. And this is the nature of the way the conversation is going on now. And this is very widespread. There's all this talk of illiberalism and democratic regression because people want society to change. And they don't just want, the tax code to change. And they don't just want bigger social programs. People want a society where the banks, factories, and industries are organized to serve public good and not profits. And because of that, because people want society to change, we're going to see leaders around the world who come into office and start to change things. And they have declared, even if it's voted for, even if it's completely, democratic, it's still not democratic if socialism is implemented. And this exposes them, right? That there will never be a socialism that the New York Times approves of. There will never be a socialism that, that they're going to, you'll turn on CNN and they'll say, well, we don't agree with this government, but they're pure and democratic and never violate human rights. No, they'll never say that. Socialists could come to power and do nothing but give puppies and candy to children. And they would accuse us of being mass murderers and dictators and tyrants. And they would say that we had to be invaded in order to not be overthrown. This is something that people need to understand, right? That there will never be a socialism that will be deemed democratic by the imperialists. They called Salvador Allende a dictator. They've called Hugo Chavez, even though he bent over backwards to accommodate the right-wing opposition, they still called him a dictator. No matter what, if we win, to the bourgeoisie, it's dictatorship. And so, people, I guess they need to get over this desire to win the approval of the bourgeoisie, to win the approval of liberal academia, because if we actually start to change things, it will never win their approval.
Very well said, Caleb. We had a super chat that just disappeared. It was, I believe Keith was asking how they can build CPI in their area and get involved. Caleb, if you could speak on that for just a moment.
Well, actually, maybe Gavin would like to answer that.
Oh,
do you want to answer that, Gavin? You're doing a lot of organizing at your college.
Yeah, sure. I'd be glad to. You can email me, gavinlockett@protonmail.com, or call me. I'll put my number in the chat. And we have been slowly but surely coordinating with people in local cells of this movement, CPI and Sign Us, Students and Youth for a New America. And so, feel free. Please reach out. You can add me on Facebook, Twitter, whatever platform, and we will make a plan going forward.
Okay, 1 second. Yeah, and let me also add that we do have Zoom calls, for planning events like this every Saturday. And we're now in the new year, starting, January 1st, we're going to begin the painful process of incorporating the CPI as a legally incorporated entity, and writing the bylaws and constitution of CPI. So we're going to need help with that. So if you want to be involved in the process, by all means, message me, message Gavin, message the CPI. It's going to be a process, but we are going to build this as an institution. And that, Gavin and Lily and others are involved with Students and Youth for a New America, which is separate from the CPI, but it's a youth organization. It's based on college campuses, and based on college campuses, high schools, et cetera, that is dedicated to these ideas as well, and a similar conception. And we also want to build different wings of what we do, right? There are some people who have different ideas and all of that. The idea is that we want to empower people. We want to help people to spread this kind of message, to get these kind of views out there. And I want to also add that the CPI is not a party. It is not a political party, right? Keaton is involved with one political party. Charlotte's involved with another one. I think there are people on this call who are members of the Democratic Socialists of America. There are people that are involved with many different parties and organizations. And we don't have we allow, we're a think tank. And if you're a socialist and an anti-imperialist and you happen to be in one party or another, that should not block you from being a member. And in fact, we'd like to have you. We'd like to have people engaging with us from different Marxist tendencies. I encourage people. I'm a member. I can't do this myself because I'm a journalist. Because I'm a journalist, I can't join any political party or organization because that would bias my journalistic work. But I encourage people that want to. I think if you agree with what we're saying here, I would encourage you not only to get involved with CPI, but to join the DSA, because the DSA is a great place to meet people. I think I first met Charlotte at a DSA event. I think Gavin has met many good people at his DSA and has organized through DSA Venezuela solidarity demonstrations and has distributed literature from the CPI at DSA events. DSA is run by, some State Department socialists and social democrats, but it is the hub where people generally nowadays, if you're interested in socialism at all, from any perspective, DSA is where you go. So, I think it would be great to have DSA as full of people who think like us as possible. And wouldn't it be great if every time CPI published a book about, Venezuela or Cuba or about a burning question on the socialist movement in the United States, that it got widely distributed within the DSA to the rank and file, I think that would be a great activity. And I would like the influence of these ideas to be widespread inside of the DSA, but as well as in other organizations. Like I said, this is not a party, right? And we're not competing, right? And, years ago, someone asked me why I didn't start a new party. I was no longer in the political group I was in. And so some people said to me, why don't I start a new party? Because it would be a joke. In addition to, there's 7 or 8 political communist groups in the United States that have some level of influence, but they're very, very small. But in addition to them, there are many, many parties all over Facebook now. Let's be real. There's many people on Facebook who have started their own party. Not going to name any names because I can't even remember them, or 5 or 6 people on Facebook, and they start their new vanguard for the proletariat, and they've got a chairman and this and that. And this is silliness. Okay. There's a lack of political seriousness about this. There's a lack of professionalism about this, right? A vanguard party is an organization that is capable of overturning capitalism and establishing a socialist society. None of the 5 or 6 or 8 communist parties in the United States that have influence are anywhere near that. And on top of that, 5 or 6 people in a Facebook group, which there are many, many of those on the internet, are definitely not capable of doing that. And so if you're to start a new group and call it a party, there's an element of almost LARPing about that, right? Live action role play where, and there is an element of that, right? And, people want to kind of put on costumes and pretend that they're Lenin or pretend that they're Mao or Kim Il-sung or something. And that, on the one hand, that can be a little bit childish and off-putting. At the same time, though, I can respect it on some level. Young people nowadays, like I said, are lacking an identity, right? They don't know who they are. They don't know what to believe in. So sometimes the LARPing, right, and the obsession with Che Guevara or the obsession with various figures from the 20th century and the the identification with them and the dressing up in the costumes, that kind of thing can be an expression of trying to struggle to find that identity. So I respect it on that level, and I think it's neat. I think people should wear suits. You know, I like the fact that people dress up and take this seriously, right? I like the fact that we have songs like the Internationale. I mean, Paul's music today was just absolutely great. You know, I like all of that on some level, but I also think we need to move toward a level of political seriousness. You know, as we try to talk about how we could actually get to socialism, how could we actually get there? So that's kind of where it's at this moment. You know, one event that just shocked me recently, and maybe there's other people here on the Zoom or on the StreamYard, you know, link here who want to comment on this, but I would like to hear people's opinions about what went down with Jimmy Dore and the Jimmy Dore AOC force the vote controversy, because that seemed to be the talk of the town all of a sudden, and it seemed to draw a pretty clear line down the middle of the left. So if there's anyone else on the call who'd like to comment on that, I'd like to hear people's opinions. Go ahead, Billy.
I think it's kind of just really exposing, like, who's on what side. I mean, so many people are just coming out and saying, Jimmy Dore, you're splitting the left. But you notice it never goes the other way. When these people are calling us tankies, Stalinists, or whatever, they never go, oh, come on, guys, let's all just get along. But when we attack not even attack, pressure AOC for, I mean, really what she's doing is gaslighting people on Twitter, like, for the past, like, 3 weeks. And then when you call her out for it, you say, oh, you're splitting the left. I mean, I don't know. It just kind of seems like people don't want AOC to actually fight for Medicare for all. That's pretty clear.
Anyone else want to comment on that? Anybody?
Yeah, anyone who's demonizing Jimmy Dore at this point is being a proxy warrior for the oligarchs. That's what I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he not to say he's done everything perfect, but I mean, in this scenario, I mean, it's pretty clear who's in the right.
Indeed. You know, and I will add that, you know, I am all for, you know, being friendly to figures like AOC, right? I urge people to tone down the, like, she's a phony, she's not a real revolutionary. You know, I don't think that we should, like, you know, demonize her as Satan, but, you know, the demand that she, you know, force the vote, you know, I think that's a legitimate demand. I think Jimmy Dore is absolutely right on his point, you know, and that there's absolutely nothing wrong with Jimmy Dore pressuring AOC to do the right thing and stand up for healthcare for all. And the fact that there's been such a backlash against Jimmy Dore, when, if you look at it, right, the Young Turks has attacked Jimmy Dore. You know, all these fake MSNBC progressives have attacked Jimmy Dore. But then if you look at it, the polls come out, the majority of Young Turks viewers, the majority of people that listen to Chapo Trap House and all of the progressive media, the rank and file think Jimmy Dore is right. And I think that's amazing. And that shows that the audience, the time is now. People are ready to hear what we have to say. Anyone else want to make a comment or ask a question? Are there more questions from the chat? Oh, sure. Go ahead.
Yes, for a long time, I actually didn't like Jimmy Dore because I have a pretty traumatic experience with people yelling at me and, you know, being poor, verbally aggressive. And Jimmy Dore was like, always to me, he's like, I always felt like attacked by him because I was, you know, once you know, I was a progressive liberal once, you know, TYT subscriber, and I would just, you know, like internalize, you know, Jimmy Dore yelling at me. He's like, "You're so fucking stupid, you dumb, wake up!" But ever since he and EOC like the whole the forced to vote movement, and after hearing his healthcare story about how he was close to dying and he like shrank 3 inches like that, and he was in ill health, and the way he allowed himself to be vulnerable, I actually have a newfound respect for him for that, and he is on the right side of history.
Any more questions from the chat, Keaton?
We have oh, I just missed it. Let me see if I marked it down. Oh yes, we had one from Dibus who wanted to know how CPI will help middle class families and rural communities.
Okay. Well, okay. I guess we're gonna do it this way. All right. I'm sorry. I'm running the stream at the same time as them. But anyway, I think the answer is that we are an ideological organization, right? We are providing the ideological answers, but there also needs to be the building of a community around these ideas. It cannot simply be an abstraction, and wouldn't it be great if in working class communities all around this country there were communist food banks? Wouldn't that be amazing if people could go and get food at a time when food insecurity is widespread, despite food being widely produced? There's hunger. Wouldn't it be great if there were communist food banks? Wouldn't it be great if there were communist clothing drives for single mothers and low-income families? Wouldn't it be great if communists were providing services while also ramping up the pressure for social programs to come into existence and demanding that that there be a bailout for the people instead of just the big banks? And I think that building a community and engaging in community service, having regular socialist and communist meetings, having a presence in communities, engaging in service, but also engaging in struggle and education is something that the CPI absolutely can do as we expand. No question about it. No question about it.
Well, I appreciate the answer, Caleb. I'm looking through, I don't see any other questions from the audience. Folks, if you have some more questions for any of our members, and feel free to direct the questions to any of us if you want to hear a specific answer from.
Yeah. Does anyone want to make a comment here in the chat? Anyone want to make a comment in the chat? I guess not. Oh, Gavin looks like he wants to make a comment. Perhaps. Go ahead, Gavin.
Oh no, I was just saying I feel so encouraged and inspired by all the people coming together here and understanding that while there's a lot of this pessimism and adolescent rage, that we can actually rise above and create a planned economy that will actually fit human needs and desires, and that more than ever before right now in America, consciousness is rising and they've been misled sometimes about what socialism is, but they're open to socialism and they're certainly against capitalism as we know it. And so I just wanted to say that, the struggle continues, and I'm very pleased about that.
Okay, great. I guess we have two more questions. Oh, Lily wants to go, and then we have two more questions from the chat.
Yeah.
So
I just kind of wanted to echo sort of what Gavin said. I've been feeling really optimistic about the future. There's actually a solution. We know what the problem is. That's been drilled into our head. But there's a solution. There's a way out. Earl Browder, his 1940 presidential campaign, a pamphlet, a book, was called The Way Out. And I think that's what socialists need to offer, the way out of the crisis.
Yeah. Maybe I'll put it that what we need is the way out, not like way out, man. But actually the way out, right? Right? The synthetic left, man, and oh well. I'm being funny, but all right, Keaton, we got a couple in the chat. All right, cool.
Yes, we do. Okay, so I missed Fluffing Fluff super chat, so we'll address that one first, if you don't mind. It was, what is the best thing we can do to help get rid of the stigma our society's brought upon the word socialism? Most people cringe when they hear it.
Okay, and there's another question too, right?
Yes, there's also how do we get a vast majority of leftist Zoomers to put more focus on structural issues and pay less mind to superstructural issues?
Okay. Does anyone else want to answer that before I take a crack at it?
To the second one, I would just say that we need to emphasize that although class is not the only thing that matters, it is the only thing that unites us all. And so that's what I would point out to people, is that identity matters, but that class matters more.
Okay. All right, and I will add that I will say that the stigma around socialism has changed. It used to be that all throughout the political spectrum, there was opposition to socialism. socialism was just a bad word. I'd say that since the rise of Bernie Sanders, and since it really started with when they started calling Obama a socialist, that because of that, now it's mainly among conservatives that you get opposition to socialism. And whereas among liberals, there's a feeling that socialism is something harmless. It's something meaning, it's free healthcare, free education, there's a kind of a feeling among socialists that it's something harmless. Because of that, we need to change what socialism really means, right? I think a lot of the conservatives who are mad, who have this cringe reaction to socialism, it's in response to what I described about synthetic leftism. That's what they don't like. They don't like, this kind of hostile, negative, destructive tone that we get out of the synthetic left, and they think that that's socialism. It's not, right? And I think a lot of folks that are Democrats and such, they think socialism is kind of meaningless and it has another, but it's among the people who cringe at socialism now. It is more rooted in kind of a mischaracterization of what it is. One thing I also wanted to mention is that I think probably something that's quite interesting is you'll notice that Trump has lost. He's leaving office soon. But he sent this crazy rant from Epoch Times out claiming that the People's Republic of China has taken over the United States. And I think that now the Trump base is just being pumped up with deranged anti-communism right now. And that shows a need for us to counter it. And that may give us more of an opportunity to get a hearing as we counter it. I think that, the fact that it seems like the Trump movement is now being told that what they're about is fighting commies. And they're just being pumped up with China is communist. Oh, I thought China was capitalist. That's why. Oh, but I guess China is communist again. And that's why we should hate them. That gives us an opportunity to give the rebuttal because we are socialists who do admire and think that good things have come out of the Chinese Revolution. So that presents us an opportunity and kind of refuting a lot of the deranged anti-communism that's coming out of the Trump camp. That creates an opportunity for us. So, yeah.
We've got a lot more questions actually to catch up on. So do you want me to give all of them out and you guys?
All of them at once. And then I think we should end after we go around. Anyone can answer these questions who wants to. And then I think we should conclude. But go ahead.
Okay. So we have, how do we win over the working class when Biden tries to topple a left-wing government somewhere around the world and the synthetic left is parroting his lies? And then, what's the best thing we can do to help get rid of the stigma? Oh, sorry, we already did that one. How do people get rid of those postmodernistic problems about ideology? And then how is the CPI getting the rights to Gus Hall? I assume that's in reference to publishing. And finally, and I think this is one we can all work on at the end, where can we find the panelists and follow and support their work?
Okay. So I guess if the panelists all want to answer that by giving their information and answering any form of the questions, I can go last and then we'll begin. So.
I'd like to answer the one about how to win over, win over the working class when Biden tries to topple some government around the world. We have to make it very clear that the same forces that are driving working people in the United States' wages down, destroying their families, getting spreading drug addiction, disease, are the same forces that are trying to topple these anti-imperialist governments. We need to get them to understand that their material well-being is tied in with the material well-being of people around the world fighting for their independence economically from imperialism.
Cool. And anybody else?
Yeah, socialist countries that are under attack have a right to self-defense, and it's not our place to meddle in their affairs, and it's not our government's place to meddle in affairs. Always have to distinguish between what our government is doing and what we're doing, because it fuels jingoism to say, oh, we're overthrowing Venezuela. Because I don't know about you, but I didn't bomb Korea. And so language matters a lot. That's what
Charlotte, do you want to give an answer?
Whatever issues that every socialist country has, we should never interfere anyway, because we have issues on our own and our own human rights violation right here in the States, including the concentration camps in the south of the border, as well as the neglectful genocide of every worker in America.
Cool. All righty. Keaton, do you want to give an answer?
I'll build on actually that one as far as the imperialism part goes. And it plays, I think, into really well into the same question about how we can get the working class on board, right? Religion is a huge part of American culture, especially within, for me at least, rural areas. And in the Bible, Jesus talks about how individuals, before they go to what he says, take the wood splinter out of their brother's eye, they need to get the 2x4 out of their own. And so, how that translates, I think, into modern politics, specifically anti-imperialism, is that we have no right to criticize another country for the miscomings when we have a literal 2x4, figuratively a 2x4 in our own national eye, if that makes any sense.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess I'll conclude. First of all, as far as the question about that's all, I mean, we don't have the copyright at this moment, and I don't know. There's got to be a conversation that's going on. I have some people I'm talking to, but obviously, anything that we published would be in full compliance with copyright law. We would never violate any publication laws or anything like that. We would always be in full compliance in everything that we do. But there is a lot of stuff out there that is not copyrighted. A lot of communist material from years past is not copyrighted, and but it's also not widely circulated. And I think that creates an opening for those of us who want to make sure that the wisdom of the past is passed on. I think that creates an opening for us to make sure that it's available. I think one point that needs to be made, and I think this can be made along with the other points, I guess, is that imperialism is not a verb. It is a system, right? Many people think that when the USA bombs Iraq, well, that's engaging in imperialism. Or people think that the USA, as it, attacked Cuba or something, it was engaging in imperialism. Well, no, imperialism is a system. It is a system where a small group of billionaires and bankers dominate the global economy. And the countries around the world that are attacked, the reason that they're attacked is because they have broken out of that system and begun a course of independent development. Usually, it either starts out and eventually becomes a socialist form of development, or it already is a socialist form of development. But regardless, the reason that the imperialists attack countries like Libya or Iraq or Venezuela or Cuba or China, the reason that they're attacking them is because they have broken out of their system. They're selling oil on the international markets in competition. They're producing their own resources. They have an independent economy. And the goal of imperialism is to keep the entire world poor so that Wall Street and London can stay rich. And that it used to be that the way imperialism worked was that in order to keep the rest of the world poor, that there was the building up of an industrial working class at home, or what they called the aristocracy of labor. And that in order to stabilize the imperialist countries, there was a section of the working class at home that had a good enough life that they were loyal to empire. They would support the wars that were necessary. They would support the system. But what we have seen in the recent decades, really since the fall of the Soviet Union, most especially after the turn of the century and the beginning of the 21st century, we've seen the eradication of the aristocracy of labor. The imperialists simply do not need a comfy industrial working class in the homeland anymore. They've got the robots to replace them with. They have got an apparatus where they can make a single laptop in 50 different countries. The idea that they need to have a layer of well-paid workers in the homeland who benefit from imperialism to keep the U.S. society stable, that's gone. They've given up on that. And because of that, we now can have solidarity. That creates the opening for workers in the United States to stand arm in arm with their class brothers in Latin America and in Africa and in Asia and in so many countries around the world. And we can have class solidarity because the same people that are economically looting this country, that are making profits from the prison industrial complex, from the opioid crisis, from the defunding and the destruction of so many communities, the same big corporations and banks that are looting places like Pennsylvania and Alabama and Mississippi and Texas, those same corporations are the corporations that countries like India and the workers in India are going on strike against and trying to break their country out of. Right? It's the same forces that want to destroy Venezuela. And that as we struggle to break the United States out of the imperialist system of global monopoly capitalism, We should stand in solidarity with countries around the world that have already done that and are struggling to build themselves up independently. And we can point to them as proof that you can break out of this system and you can raise people up out of poverty and you can build a new country and a new society. And that can be the understanding that what the Cubans have done, what the Venezuelans have done, what China has done is an example of what we would like to do, right? Except we're already starting out at a higher level of development. So it'll be a much easier process. We won't start at third world conditions. It's funny that Trump's slogan was "Make America Great Again," because if you look at what the Chinese Communist Party has done, they have made China great again, right? I mean, that's basically what they did. They took a country that was the sick man of Asia, that suffered a century of humiliation, and they made it into the second, and now many say it's the first, the largest economy in the world at this point. Now, some people say it's still the second. It depends whose statistics you go by. But they have raised hundreds of millions of people from poverty. They have made China great again, right? Meanwhile, what has Trump done? I mean, he's made the United States completely fall apart with this pandemic. I mean, the opioid addiction rates, the poverty, the suffering, everything has gotten worse. And it's really only through socialism that a good life can be created. And the difference, we wouldn't say make America great again. We wouldn't say that because when America was quote unquote great in the 50s and 60s, that came at the expense of people in the third world. That came at with the blood of people that were colonized and suffered under Jim Crow. We don't want to restore that. We want to refound the United States. We want the United States to be reborn on principles of brotherhood and sisterhood and solidarity and relationships with countries around the world based on win-win cooperation, where we talk about a shared destiny for all mankind. And countries are getting wealthier by doing business with us, and we're getting wealthier by doing business with them. And poverty is eradicated, and higher forms of technology are developed, like high-speed railway, like fusion energy, like artificial intelligence, and that there's no longer a contradiction between technological progress and economic prosperity. That as technology increases, human beings get a better life at the same time. We don't have a situation where abundance leads to poverty and people become homeless because there are too many houses, or people go hungry because there's too much food. Socialism is about applying science to the economy, breaking out of the system of global monopoly corporations that beat down and impoverish people all over the world. And that's the vision, right? Socialism is an anti-imperialist philosophy that seeks to apply science and human reason to the economy and get out of the irrationality of the market. So I think on that note, we probably want to conclude. Did Eric, did you want to say something?
Well, I'm just going to build on what you said. I was just going to say that the forces behind the attacks on socialists or anti-imperialist states are our same enemies. They're right here at home. They're not thousands of miles away in another country. They're right here at home. They're the same capitalist class that are trying to overthrow currently existing socialist states and anti-imperialist states as well. And this is why we need international proletarian solidarity in order to combat U.S. imperialism.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I think on that note, we're going to conclude. So thank you, everyone. We will have another web conference next time. If you want to be involved in the Saturday Zoom calls, please contact me or somebody else here, and we'll plug you in. And our great work to build the Center for Political Innovation is continuing. So best wishes to everyone. Stay safe, stay warm in this holiday season, and we will be in touch. The revolution continues. Good night.